Recommend. Today I'm hanging out with Barry Murphy, head analyst at EDJ. Today we're going to talk about some of the challenges and solutions enterprises and other large organizations are facing as they tackle the overwhelming amount of data piling up in storage. So welcome, Barry.
Thanks, Bill. Happy to be here.
All right, let's just jump right into it here. We want to really talk about, reality here. What are the technical and organizational challenges that enterprises are facing as they struggle to wrap up or wrap their brains around their data problems?
Well, let's start first with the organizational ones, Bill. Most people, if you ask them, are information hoarders, right? They need information to do their jobs. Their email helps them do their jobs. There's valuable knowledge, nuggets of knowledge in the information stores that they have. So that's the root of the problem, is that as information workers in an information economy, we want to store more and more information, and we're creating it at volumes and rates in which we've never seen in history, because there's more than just email. There's social media, there's the documents we put on SharePoint or out in file systems. And all of these things people think they need and or organizations think they need. And then what happens is you take that sort of organizational problem of I need my information, it's going to help me do my job, and you run into the technical limitations of really trying to be able to get at that information when you need it. So information access becomes a problem, search becomes a problem. All of these things get harder and harder as the information builds up. And meanwhile, that information presents a lot of risk. Yes, it presents a lot of opportunity, but it also presents a lot of risk. And when the opportunity is probably, outweighed by the risk, you run into this problem of what do I do with this information? How do I get to what's good? And how do I get rid of what's bad or unnecessary?
Yeah, that's a great point. And as you started off, you said people are basically information hoarders, and I think that's pretty much human nature. As you can count on, they're going to keep everything that they could possibly ever use just in case they need it sometime in the future. So and like you say, that's one of the problems that I run across in talking to customers, is that there's just so much information, and the enterprise, the organization, has no idea what's in there. And that obviously causes the problems you talked about, being able to find stuff.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, maybe another way to look at this is, what are the risks of not managing data?
So the risks are multifold. You run into the problem of cost containment. So you risk being spending more on storage than you otherwise would. And let's forget the argument that storage is cheap, because the rate at which volume of data increases does not keep up with the rate at which the price of storage goes down. So storing more and more information is going to be incremental cost. So there's risk there. The other risk comes from the legal side of the world. So the company gets sued based on the federal rules of civil procedure and all the precedents set by the amendments to those rules in 2006, the company needs to be able to find whatever is responsive in that data. And the term responsive is, it's sort of a meldable word. It relies on being able to understand if something relates to a case or not. And so the risk is that as you store more and more information, you're going to spend huge amounts of money in the e-discovery process, whether it's in collecting that information, preserving it, processing it, or where the real cost may be in paying high-priced legal folks to review it. So there's risks there as well. You also run into more complex compliance processes because there's more and more data to go through. So the risks of not managing data are huge. And then there's kind of the opportunity cost, right? Which is, if I have all of this data, how do I know what's valuable and what's not? So you also risk having what I kind of refer to as a frustrating worker environment, where I'm a worker, as we talked about, I hoard my information, and now I go to find it, I don't have any real good way of finding it because keyword search isn't often enough. And let me give you an example. So years ago, I did work with a pharmaceutical company that was trying to make an argument for email hoarding. And by luck, they had found, someone who had organized their information very well in email had found some formula work that they had done in the early 90s that they had saved in an old email system that ended up being used in a drug that they created in the late 2000s and had some success with. So they were using that as a proof point of we need to hoard our information. But the reality was that person organized their information well and was able to get at it. Keyword search would have never found that information. So the risk is that people hoard this information, they think it's valuable, there's really nothing there, and you still have storage costs, e-discovery risk, compliance risk, all those risks still existing. And just because you think you've got all this valuable information, you're actually increasing your risk profile and your cost profile for that matter.
Yeah, that's a great point. Somebody I used to work for years ago made the point that has been often quoted after, is that it costs many times more to actually find and use data than to actually store it. So it's not just the cost of the gigabyte; it's the cost of everything else.
Right, and if everyone in the world had library skills to organize their information into a consistent and reasonable taxonomy, then maybe this wouldn't be a problem. But I can't name any three people that have those skills outside of someone with a library sciences degree. And it's just the reality of trying to do things in that way, of foldering information or trying to fit it into a taxonomy or even a records file plan. Human beings are inconsistent, and that's just going to drive up the mismanagement of information and, again, increase your risk because now you've got it, you can't find it. Now here come the sanctions and litigation, here come the problems in PII being found in things because it's not being managed well. So you could create a very nightmarish picture, and we've seen it, right? We've seen it come up with TJX, we've seen it come up with lots of other organizations in Morgan Stanley and the Zubile case where this information was around, companies didn't know about it, and it came back to burn them. And let's not forget the Enron case also.
Yeah, good one. Kind of following that line of thought, you've written about predictive governance. What is it, and how does it help solve some of the problems that you've talked about?
Yeah, I think the best way to describe how predictive governance helps solve this problem is that it gets you past the inertia of trying to take control of your information. There's so much information, so much sprawl. How do we get started? We already know that the humans, that we as workers, are probably not going to be able to go through information at the volume that we have it and figure out what to do with it. So predictive information governance can make use of these, new but not totally new. They've been around for a while. Technologies like concept searching or topic clustering or near deduplication, or all sorts of ways of analyzing unstructured content and starting to bring some predictive analytics to the process. So now we're not starting from scratch, and that inertia usually results from starting from scratch. In the legal space, this has gained a lot of traction in the predictive coding world, right? We're trying to determine whether or not a document is responsive to a case, or maybe whether or not it's privileged information. And what we've learned in the legal world is that when you take that technology and you apply it, and you have people who know how to do that within a given process, who have some statistical skills to do validation and testing on it, that it works, and it works better than keyword search and traditional manual forms of review. So predictive governance is taking those same concepts and now just applying them upstream in the information lifecycle. And instead of trying to determine, is this related to the Brown versus Board of Education case, trying to determine, is this document related to something that I have in a records management file plan? Or is it related to a central archive folder that I have in my email archive, that means I want to retain it so that you can start, getting through this information without completely relying on humans to get going on it themselves.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think one of the points you made there at the end really is a hot button for me, and it's the idea that up till now, the vast majority of organizations were relying on employees to do this for you, usually in a manual process with very complex instructions that they hardly ever looked at, and the amount of actual employee compliance was near zero over a period of time. And predictive governance actually gets you to that point where it can be automated, especially in an accurate, intelligent manner.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note too that it goes beyond what we've ever thought of as search. So this is not necessarily predictive search, right? Let's take a hot topic from today's world. We've got this, National Security Agency and this leak that's happening. One of the interesting things that you hear in the news a lot now is how the government is saying we're not looking at the actual content, we're looking at the metadata. Now, predictive governance can also do that same type of thing, which is correlate metadata between things to establish relationships. So what's so interesting about this is that in the early 2000s, that type of technology was in play for what we call the portal or knowledge management world, where we would do expertise location. And all expertise location was doing was looking at who's reading documents that are written by whom, and we create these social networks. And that can give us some intelligence as to maybe are these custodians related to each other in the legal world, or maybe now we could see the relationship between departments, and that can help us create retention plans. So it's kicking things off. It can bring that automation that you talked about, and ultimately, with the right quality assurance programs in place, you don't have to look at the document because you know within sort of standard confidence intervals how accurate am I in terms of grouping this information together and making decisions on this information.
Yeah, great point. We got less than a minute left, but I wanted to hit one more question with you, and that is predictive governance related to big data, and if so, how?
I think that it's definitely related. I think big data, as we know it, is business intelligence right now, and I think predictive governance is really business intelligence for the unstructured side of the world, which just so happens to be 90% of the information that exists in the world. Because structured data is easier to manipulate, we've seen business intelligence and that side of big data take off. My hope is that we'll see predictive information governance become, really what we call big information. Big data is a term; it's here to stay. But I think the unstructured side is where the real value is going to be, and we're just starting to tap into that.
Great. I totally agree. All right, I'd like to thank Barry Murphy of the EDJ group for joining us today to talk about information governance. Thanks, Barry.
Thank you, Bill. Happy to be here.